Hey everyone, welcome to the Whitewater Podcast. This is episode 2. This month we're having a drink with our brewmaster, Sean Goddard. To give you guys a reminder, this podcast is all about making connections between people, stories, everything we do outdoors, and bringing it all together in one easy listening, easy watching podcast just for you. What you can expect is conversation about beer, gin, amazing food, sustainability, outdoor activities, and much, much more. So, without further ado, let's bring in our special guest, Brewmaster, Sean Goddard. Say hey, Sean.
Hey, Sean.
Perfect. So, before we really get into things, let's fill our glasses up. As you can see, we've already been having a small beer in preparation. But why don't you tell us what we're going to be drinking today?
Sure. I think we're going to start off with our espresso IPA. It's called Jacked Rabbit. We have beer that we've never brewed on a large scale, and we did it for the first time in this 4-pack we released for Christmas. So it'll be nice to dive in and see how it's tasting.
Yeah, this is our Whitewater collection, available out on our retail store, on our website, and in the LCBO. But it is a 4-pack, and like Sean said, Jacked Rabbit is exclusively available in this collection, and it is an espresso IPA. I think it was our second ever season.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Second or third, anyway. Okay, so let's fill these up. And while we do this, Sean, why don't you tell us a little bit about this beer?
Sure. So the beer itself, I guess the distinguishing part of it is the espresso that we use in it. So it's meant to be a pretty straightforward, more malt-driven IPA. So it has a lot of hoppy characters. It has a good bit of balancing bitterness, but it has enough space in those flavors to allow the coffee to come through on a fairly aggressive level. The whole point of the beer itself was to allow the espresso to be the star of the show and not have the IPA kind of overtake it. I'm not sure how many you've had, but I've had so many flavored IPAs over the years, and sometimes they just miss the mark on, well, you added this thing to that beer, be it fruit, be it spices, be it those type of things, and you don't really end up tasting those. It's just kind of an IPA with a little bit of something in the background. So
yeah, I think one thing we've always really prioritized is when you're adding something to a beer, we've tried to really make it an espresso, in this case, an espresso IPA.
For sure.
So it's still an IPA. You still 100% know it's an IPA.
Yeah.
And you get the flavor of espresso coming through.
For sure.
It's not suddenly a coffee beer and all you taste is coffee.
Exactly. Because that would be a coffee beer, right?
Right.
Or
the opposite, where you can't taste that other flavor coming through.
Well, that's it. You have to make sure that you're really, especially when it hits the market side of things, you don't want to have confusion, right? You want to make sure that when someone drinks it, like when you drink this beer, you're like, yes, I taste espresso, and it's an IPA.
Yeah.
It's a winner, right? So
why don't you give us a quick run through of the specs on this very quickly?
Sure, yeah. So it's a little bit of a higher ABV beer than we normally brew on that level. The coffee itself adds a little bit of bitterness as well, so it balances off. But yeah, the beer comes out at 7.2. Yeah. And it says 92 IBUs, and I think that sometimes people, when they see that high IBU content, they're always thinking like, oh, this beer is going to be so bitter and in my face. But because actually the coffee almost like mellows out with its own bitterness, it actually doesn't come across as too bitter to your palate. Yeah, so the beer pours kind of, an amberish color, and it has obviously a nice thick rocky head. I think the people that can actually see the video will see how nice the head is, but the people that can't see the video obviously have to go buy it and find that out themselves. So
yeah, if you're listening on wherever you listen to your podcasts, like Sean said, it's a nice amber color. So a little bit darker than lots of the modern day IPAs.
For sure.
All of the sort of juicy, light colored IPAs. But yeah, I actually find that the coffee really mellows out some of the bitterness, which is why we cold brew it, right?
Exactly, yeah. And the big part of the cold brew side of it is so that we're not getting a lot of those astringent flavors. I'm sure any of the people that are big into teas, they understand, you don't add boiling water to tea. That's kind of not how you make tea, because you're going to grab a lot of those astringent flavors out of those tea leaves themselves. It's the same idea with the coffee, where we want to get all that nice, rich coffee flavor out of it, but we don't want to have those astringent flavors that overheating it will do.
So for those of you that are not familiar with cold brewing, it's literally adding cold water to coffee beans or tea. What that means is you have to do it for a lot longer. So we do this for about 18 hours, but you get an amazing coffee, full-bodied flavor without that astringency.
For sure.
So it's a really cool dynamic. It's the best way to drink coffee in my mind. Cold brew it, then heat it up. But I don't have 18 hours to make every cup of coffee. So
yeah, I think the people in the world that do drink coffee probably want their coffee a little quicker than that. I guess you could go almost a full 24 hours in advance, but I don't know how many people are going to make coffee the day before for the next person. And it also was a lot of the difficulties when it came to making this beer, because it was the first time we had made this beer on a large scale. And when you're trying to make, 6,000 liters of product, it's really hard to figure out, how much coffee are we going to put in this? Right. So it was pretty fun watching them. Basically, because we need a coarse ground on it, so we grind it ourselves. It was fun watching them grind, 16 kilograms of espresso beans to make sure they were ground exactly like we needed them, so that they weren't overground, right?
Which is crazy, because rewinding, like I say, this was our second or third ever seasonal before Sean actually started with the brewery. It derived from my love for both hoppy beers and coffee. I was like, great, let's put those two things together. I was bored here on a Saturday, I think in October, November, no customers coming in, and what do I like to make in a beer? And went with this, but I used to do it with a few hundred grams of coffee. Now we're in kilograms, and
for sure,
on a much bigger scale.
Yeah. So
the way I want to start all of these podcasts, we've already diverged off my list of what I meant to be doing. But is doing quick fire questions with all of our guests. So Sean, we're going to get into a quick fire session.
I'm nervous. I don't even know what to expect.
You don't know what I'm going to ask, that's for sure. Let's get into it. First question, favorite part of the brewing process?
It would probably be fermentation.
Fermentation, yeah. Okay. Favorite WC beer, current or all time?
It's always been Whistling Paddler.
Whistling Paddle. Yeah. Favorite non-WBC beer?
Oh, that's a good one. I think my go-to is normally either Octopus Wants to Fight or Ransack.
Okay, so IPAs.
IPAs, always, yeah.
Favorite gin cocktail?
Gin and tonic. Definitely like gin and tonics.
Yeah, classic. Favorite outdoor activity?
It's probably hiking.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome. I thought after the last couple of years you were maybe going to say golf, but
it's true. But I think that golf, I consider it more of a sport than it is like a kind of an outdoor social activity.
For sure.
Right?
And I mean, I know you've always been into hiking, so that makes sense. Netflix show of the moment or alternative streaming service?
I've actually been really into 60 Days In right now. It's a show where they go to prison for 60 days. It's pretty funny.
Like a reality kind of show?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Favorite recipe to make at home? I don't know if it's beer or food, but let's go with both. Favorite beer recipe to make at home and favorite food to make at home?
Yeah, sure. So favorite food to make at home would definitely be Asian-inspired dishes. Something that has, like a noodly type dish that my wife's vegetarian, so easy to kind of go meat, non-meat, and have a dish for the whole family.
Yep.
Favorite beer to make at home, ironically enough, is just going to be more IPAs, because if I'm making beer at home, that's what I'm making.
Fair enough. Got to fill your tap system with some IPAs. Bucket list goal.
Ooh, bucket list goal.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I think that right now my bucket list goal for me on a professional level is probably getting a beer that is a little more world renowned. I think that's a big bucket list goal for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Get some beers entered into some World Brewing Awards.
That's right. Yeah.
absolutely.
See if we can get some World Cups in at some point in my career here.
I like that one. That's awesome. Who do you admire and why?
Just asking all the hard
questions. We're really going deep and meaningful.
Yeah, so that's a hard one. I would say that if I was going to pick one person, it would probably end up being a guy I know named Barry. So a guy I know named Barry, he actually was the one that taught me how to all grain brew. But for a person that has been brewing as long as he has, he's been home brewing since the 70s, and for someone to stick with it for that long and, be a beer judge and consistently just be pro, craft beer and beer related, it's just something I respect a lot about him, and it's hard to keep that going for, 30, 40 years.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So it takes some dedication, and
sure.
definitely.
Awesome. Thumbs up to Barry. Okay, final question, another deep and meaningful one. Favorite board game?
Ironically enough, it's got to be Risk.
Risk.
I think that
nice.
I very much like long, intense board games, and I think that if it's not ending friendships, it's not worth playing. It's just that's where I'm at with it. So
this is great news for me because that's probably my favorite.
Nice.
So
well, now we know where we got to go, right?
We got to get a company Risk set.
So when you see my termination, it's probably because I beat Chris at Risk, and he just didn't want to tell anybody about it. So.
Yeah. World domination, termination. Awesome. Okay, so that was Quickfire with Chris. We're going to get away from Quickfire now.
Sure.
And into more of your story with brewing and Whitewater. So why don't you tell us how you got into Brewing General?
Sure.
I'm guessing Barry's going to.
Yeah, he'll come in the story at some point. I'm guessing probably like 12 years ago-ish. I didn't really drink beer much. I think that my go-to beer was Carlsberg, and I think that was because it was the only beer that didn't give me a headache. I very much, a lot of, I don't know if it's the sulfites or whatever it ends up being, but a lot of preservatives they use on the macro side of things that affect me greatly. And I know now why, because I have such an intense palate. Mm-hmm. And I'm very susceptible to a lot of flavors and aromas and those type of things. So I actually used to just drink a lot of whiskey. That was my go-to. It'd either be, whiskey with a splash of ginger ale, or, even just whiskey and water, whiskey on the rocks, those type of things. A couple of years later, I had met my now wife. Okay. And she, I guess, was into beers. I had not known at the time. And, excuse me. That's what happens when you drink when you talk. So on our second-ish date, we went to her cottage, which is just in Horton here, so it's not that far from here. We were having fun, and she was like, "Hey, do you want to drink a beer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll have beer." It's, you don't want to say no, even though I didn't really drink beer at that time. And she came out with a bottle of Chimay Premier, which is the red-labeled bottle, and the 750 ml bottles. And I'm like, "Oh my God, this girl, she's going to give me some sort of weird, barley-based thing, and it's going to taste horrible."
Yeah. I'm going to have to pretend.
It's got a cork in it. Like, what beer has cork in it, right? Like, this makes no sense. So she cracked it, and we drank it, and I'd never tasted anything like that in my entire life. I was like, wow, this beer is very full. It's got a nice body on it. It's, huge and fruity and in your face, and it's 9%. I've had 2 glasses. I'm already drunk. This is great.
This is awesome.
This is great. Yeah. It's you're not drinking 15 Coors Light and being like, yeah, I have a headache. I'm going to go home now. Right. So that was kind of the start of my beer journey, where over that next 6-month period, she had different beers and kind of got me into buying different beers. And then after that 6 months, I was like, this is really interesting. And I can be very OCD when it comes to hobbies. When I get into something, I dive in really, really far. And I realized that buying all that beer is very expensive.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, well, I'm spending too much money here. So my wife now, who wasn't my wife then, she actually bought me a little kit for Christmas. And I was like, okay, I'm going to make beer. And one of my good friends, Eric, he wanted to start brewing beer as well. Yeah. So he lives in Peterborough. I live here. We'd actually brew and just chat and talk back and forth, and started that brewing process. From there, I realized, okay, I suck at this. So I'm doing something wrong, right?
And as the most first-time homebrewers.
For sure. And then I'm like, well, there must be an avenue, right? So from there, I actually I did searching the internet. I found a group called the Members of Barleyman, which is a huge homebrew club in Ottawa. At that time, I think they had 400 to 500 members already. They're probably well above 800 now.
It's funny because, just to interrupt you there, when I started trying to start the brewery, all I kept hearing about was the mob and the mob. And I was like, is this some kind of biker gang equivalent for the brewing industry?
For sure.
But no, members of Parliament. Makes sense.
And so I was like, okay, well, let's join this, right? So it's a very old school type of forum where they run a mailing list.
Cool.
Right? So it's all email based. There is no forum. There's no real moderators. Like, they have some people looking, but it's really just a free for all. And people really just go on there and post whatever they want, and it's very social and it's awesome. So went on there being like, hey guys, I don't know how to brew. Like, what should I do? Where should I go? Had a conversation with a bunch of people that I'm actually still friends with today, and we talk, fairly often over, either on the list or via text. And that came up with this guy named Barry. So this guy named Barry is like, hey man, like, just come to my house. I will show you.
Nice.
And I'm like, okay, I don't know this random
a little
stranger,
creepy, but sure, why not?
But he's only like 5 minutes from my house, so like, why would I not try this, right? So ended up going to Barry's house, and from there, he's like, oh, we'll just make all grain. Like, that's the way to go. And knowing a bit of that side of it, and not really delving in too much into the brewing side, I'm like, well, yeah, let's do that. Like, I can buy barley, I can do all this, and it was basically did an extract batch the first 2 times I did it, but I did steep some grains into it. And then this one was like, no, we're not doing any extracts, just all grain, and we're brewing in his garage/driveway. And I think the first beer that we made together was a Hefeweizen. Nice. So, it's a big yeasty flavored thing. Obviously, because of the Belgian beers before, it really influenced me in that sense of just loving how beers can taste so complex, and it is just yeast character, right?
Yeah, it's really not packed full of hops.
Well, that's
it's
it.
Different
Exactly.
yeasts coming through.
Exactly, and like all those esters, and that's like probably why I said fermentation is probably my favorite part of brewing, because it's something you dive into a lot. Right? And
that's one of the not to digress, but it's one of the areas people really don't realize, or a lot of people don't realize. Sure. I didn't used to.
Yeah.
An area or an ingredient that makes such a big difference in flavor is yeast. It doesn't just create the alcohol; it really flavors a bit.
For sure. I was watching something on fermentation a long time ago, or maybe I was listening to a podcast. It was one or the other. They were talking like, well, we could just make like barley extract and add vodka to it, and that's beer, right? And it was proving how that wasn't, because you don't get that beery flavor without yeast fermentation. And yeast fermentation is a huge part of beer.
Yeah, it's not just pure alcohol.
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you think of it in a layman's term, it's like, well, why can't I make this malted barley liquid, add alcohol to it? Right. There's beer, right?
Yeah. Add some ethanol.
But it's just you need that fermentation to really, like the way I call it, like the beery flavor of beer can't happen without that fermentation. Right. So
makes sense.
Yeah. So brewed with Barry. He taught me some things. Went home, was like just driven. I think I filled half of my room I had with malt. I used to get these pails. Used to actually get them from the wine surplus, so like the wine must that they would use, they'd sell the pails afterwards for like $2.
Nice.
I think I had like 30 pails of malt. And like every malt you could humanly imagine, more malt than we hold at the brewery right now. Like just every variety and kilns and roasted and all this stuff. And then I just went in hard. I bought a fridge. I bought 4 taps to go into that fridge. I got all the kegs for it. I started pouring draft at my house. There was a point where when I had when Carrie was pregnant with our first daughter, there was a point where I was brewing every week, to the point where I loved brewing more than I loved drinking it.
The beer,
I would literally dump kegs out so that I would have free kegs so I could keep brewing, right? And I converted this massive.
If you're brewing every week, like
there's
maybe
no way.
even multiple kegs,
for sure.
There's no way you're going through that on a whole.
Well, and as you know, like when you start getting a little bit older, right? Like you're not out all the time. You don't have people at your house 24/7. And I'm sitting there like, I have 80 liters of beer in kegs right now. If I drink all this, I'm an alcoholic, so I can't do that side of it. And I would invite people over. We used to have a board game night, and I would tell them like, do not bring beer to my house. I have all the beer that you need here. But yeah, so I was brewing like crazy, and then we had our first daughter, and by that time I probably had like a couple hundred batches under my belt at that point. It was also the time I started submitting some of these beers to like homebrew competitions, right? And they were being well received. I think right around the time that I realized I think I'm actually good at this was I won a medal in the Ales Comp. So the Ales Comp is out west, but it's the largest homebrew competition in Canada.
Cool.
I know the members of Barley Mint are trying to get there as well, but the Ales Comp is probably one of the big ones, and I won it for a Belgian beer, no surprise. And that was when I was like, I like this. I want to do this, right? And you know, my wife at that point in time was like, if you talk to me about brewing one more time, I'm leaving you. Because it just consumed me. It's just everything I did.
So
right?
I'm just thinking now, like that was when you were doing it for a hobby.
For sure, for sure. It's funny though that now that I do it for a living, I have that avenue now. Right? I don't bring a lot of like the technical brew talk home anymore because I have an avenue, right? Like, I get to talk to my employees about that every single day and geek out with them and go that side of it. From there, I had our first kid. Carrie was working with the government on contract at that point. She was only home for about 3.5 months for her maternity leave. Okay. And then she had to go back to fulfill her contract or she would have lost her job.
Having just been through that, that's a really short time.
It is. It's a very short time, right? So me being, you know, devoted dad, always have been. It's you know, my life right now is literally like it's beer and my family. Those are my only two things. I don't really care much about anything else.
Could be worse priorities to have.
For sure. And so I'm like, no, like I'll take the parental leave. Yeah. Like I'll take the 9 months that needs to be. I'll stay home with the kid. I'm fine with that. Like I'm super excited to get her to at least walk so that she's not just kind of like a lump that I can't do anything with, right? And then I brewed so much. I think there was batches that I brewed that I just dumped down the drain. I never even got them in the keg. Yeah. Because I was just so into brewing, and it was ironically enough, it felt like to me like if I put her down for a nap and I mashed in, she would nap longer. I don't know why, but maybe it was just a smell of the barley and all that side of it in the house, right? But so I could actually get a full batch in her nap.
Nice.
So like, you know, sometimes I had to chill it out. Sometimes I had to still transfer it by the end.
We had to put a stop to that. Sean is not allowed just to mash in and then dump it down the drain anymore.
It's not okay.
That was an old thing.
So I'm at home. I'm brewing like crazy, having fun, loving life. Family's there. Like it was a really good time in my life, right? And the parental leave came to an end, and talking with my boss, and I'm like, hey, you know, like, gonna come back to work in a couple weeks, you know, like, we're still on track for everything. He's like, no, I moved the office to Brockville. And I was like, okay, like something you could have told me a long time ago, right? And I was pretty frustrated. Like the job that I worked in before this, I wasn't happy there to begin with. I put 10 years into that place, and I don't think they really cared that I was there for 10 years. And literally I got off the phone with them, pulled out Facebook, and saw the post for here. Cool. It was literally in a 20-minute period. I got off the phone, and then seeing a post that you guys were hiring a brewer here. Nice. And it was just one of those things where I was like, you know, like I gotta dive into this, and I'm gonna go hard. And thankfully, like my wife was super supportive. I think it's because she just didn't want me to talk about brewing anymore. Maybe she saw like if he does this, he will stop talking. Exactly. I think that's exactly what it was. Like I don't even care if they pay you nothing. Just leave the house and go do it somewhere else, right? So, so that's kind of the story up until now.
We had quick fire with Chris, and now we've had stories with Sean. You might remember this. I don't. Yep. What was your first WBC brew?
Sure, yeah.
Tell us about it.
I think that the very first beer that I brewed here was, I'm pretty sure that it was Whistling Paddler. Because it was a beer that I gravitated towards right away when I was here, which ironically enough, and I think the reason I remember that because the first main beer we brewed at Lakeside was Whistling Paddler. Yep. And I remember when we did that, I was like, I think that was the first one I brewed here too. But I think the first beer that I'd want to say anything about, to be honest, was we did a Hellesbach here. Yeah. That was the first time where I was like, guys, I want to make this beer. Like, I'm good. I can do it. I swear I can do it. And that was the first time you guys, I'd be like, well, send that, John. And let's do that, right? And I remember... I
forgot. I completely remember that. Yeah. I had forgotten about it.
And I remember because, you know, we don't have fermentation control at Riverside. It's not like we do now. We do now, right? But we didn't back then, right? And I remember getting
and what Sean means is like, we didn't have anywhere to control a temperature. We just had 2 rooms at different temperatures, and we would literally wheel the fermenters between the rooms to try and control the temperature.
For sure.
Now we're a little bit more high tech.
A little bit. Hey, it worked though.
That's
right?
what we had to do. Yeah.
It worked. We never had too many issues with it on that side. But the reason I remember that beer specifically, one, because I was like, this is my first commercial beer, like my first commercial beer, right? My recipe, I can do it. We're gonna actually sell it here. So excited about it. I think I held a growler in that back shelf of that fridge for like a year and a half. It sat there, and I was going, let's see how this ages. But the reason I remember it is because we didn't have fermentation control, right? And we needed to have a lager, right? So I got this specific yeast that could be a little bit hotter ran. And we literally were pushing it from the fridge to the fermentation, like every 12 to 14 hours, we were just like running it back and forth, keeping it at this optimal temperature. And that beer turned out great. Like it was,
and that would have been when we were messaging each other. I mean, I don't remember that specific time, but I remember messaging like, can you move this from this position to this position? Like, and leaving notes like, this needs to move into this room at this time.
Just leaving notes for everybody else at the time. And but it was super fun times, right? Like I think it's the one great thing that I think that I can say about the whole time that I've been at Whitewater, and a lot of it has to do with it's still being my large passion in life, is that even back in those days when it was super stressful and I had no sleep and I had just had a baby, but it's never felt like work. Even in those times, it's never felt like work, and even to this day, it's never felt like work.
Well, I remember I think having had your. Had you just had your first child when you started?
I did, yeah.
You just had your first. And I think that played into our favor because sometimes you would show up at 4 a.m.
No, for sure, yeah.
Instead of 6
for
because you were up anyway.
Yeah.
And you'd put her back to sleep. And then it's like, well, I may as well go to work.
Yeah. I'm sure Carrie will kill me for saying this, but there was times where I would wake up at 2 with her, right? And it's Carrie's time to sleep, that's fine, right? And I would get up and Iris was a little colicky when she was young, so she wouldn't let us put her down at all, right? So I would sit there and I'd rock her for a good hour and a half. I'd finally get her back to bed, and I'd be like, if I go to work now, she can't wake me back up. And I would literally just get in the car. I would leave at 2:45 to 3 a.m. and I would drive here, and I would just smash in, right? It's
Sorry,
but it did work out well. Yeah, she's excited to see this, so I'm sure she'll shake her finger at me a little bit. But it all worked out in the end, right? I think that we're all super happy as a family, so it's great.
That's awesome. What do you consider your biggest success at WBC so far?
Oh, I think it's twofold. I think that my largest success is obviously just getting that large system operational, and that has been a succession of almost years, right? Of really just trying to hammer in a consistency. It's something that no one ever tells you when you go into the commercial side of things, and especially when you go into a company that's as hungry as we are for growth and really just being out there, is that the animal never stops, right? So you have to kind of get in this mindset of, how do I make sure that the beer is always flowing out of those tanks, right? And it's a very different mindset, something that doesn't come from manufacturing as a whole, where they're very used to those types of things, right?
And also, you talk craft brewing.
For sure.
Right? This is kind of the epitome of craft, where we started on our Riverside system.
For sure.
Where it is as hands-on as physically possible.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Zero automation.
Nothing.
You're adjusting levers to adjust temperatures.
For sure. Yeah. Exactly.
Growing all the way up to our system now, where it's still not heavily automated.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can help with temperatures a little bit.
There's pumps. Pumps help, right?
We're not physically pouring everything, but
sure.
You go through that process, and every step of growth has been learning, because neither of us were in commercial brewing before this company. So, so that's kind of
it's
cool.
an interesting thing too, where obviously when I first came on here, we obviously Lakeside was in the forefront, like we were talking about it. And it was going to happen at some point, right? And we had those conversations, and I remember having conversations with yourself and Chris, and you guys telling me well, yeah, but it's good that you're here. Like, you need to be working on this thing and see what we used to be, and it's something that people don't get now. No. Right?
Well, I hear you now telling your brew team about times down here, and now that we've upgraded the system, and if there's challenges, but you have no idea. This is easy.
Well, that's it, exactly. And going through, that kind of year and a half grind that I had out here, where win and we won, we won with it, right? And I think that was the biggest part, is that we could make something that was so physically labor intensive, and it just was at times. But again, the reason why one of our core values is fun, right, is just the fact that we have to keep it fun. Because this can be a grind. It just can be. And that's, it's the biggest misconception about brewing is that people are like, this is a fun job. I'm going to come here and have fun. Like, we're going to drink beer all day long. It's going to be so great.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it's a brewery. You must drink all day.
Well, that's it. And then they show up and they're like, you mean we don't drink at all? I'm like, no, it's work.
We
We're
really
working. But I think that, it's finding the right individuals where you have that passion. I think that's, no matter how it ends up being, just like, the other day where we had to finish off the 12 packs for the 12 packs Christmas, right? It's like, well, okay, we need to get this through. It's not going to happen.
Let's go through the night.
Let's just do it, right? And get a nice hungry group of people with me and, literally start at 11 p.m. and, finish at, 5 in the morning and love every minute of it, right? So.
For sure. Before we go on to the next question, my beer's empty. You're almost finished, but I feel like you're just being polite.
It's true.
So I'm going to pick the next one. And I always like drinking IPAs followed by stouts.
Cool.
I've never had an espresso IPA followed by a peanut butter stout.
It's true. That's two very unique beers, right?
Right. So I'm interested to see how that goes.
That makes sense. I think I'm actually going to go to the Wild Bog. I think that's, I'd be interested to see even just on the coffee side how that'll meld with the cranberries.
Yeah.
I think that's
I was torn between those two as well. Already just licking my finger, I feel I like it. It's got a bit of sweetness to it. I can't figure out this box. You can tell I'm not on the pack.
They're just meant to be open and drank in one shot, Chris,
Damn.
That's why we don't ask Chris for help all the time. That's all. It'd be interesting to see, though, how, just that back flavor you have of the espresso melding in with that peanut, right? Because I think that, peanut and espresso is good pour, Chris. You did well on that one. I'm just saying.
Did you see the first one? Because you poured yours perfectly, and I did, I think, worse than this one.
Yeah, Chris has got a good half a glass of foam on there. It's a good one. It's a good one.
Now that we've butchered that process, well, thanks to a perfectly timed video editing cut, I have my perfectly poured beer and my well-organized Whitewater collection.
I feel like you were overcompensating with that pour, Chris. I'm just saying.
It took that long that I had to keep topping it up. I'm drinking peanut butter shake.
Yep. I'm still drinking this Wild Bog, which is super tasty.
What I really like about the peanut butter shake is, for me, it brings good diversity into our lineup. Like, it's not a beer I would have 3 or 4 of, for sure. But I don't think we have many beers where there's one that you would only have one of. And that could sound like a bad thing, but I think it's great. Like, it's a really great dessert beer.
For sure.
It's got really big, bold peanut flavors, tiny bit of sweetness. Yeah. And I think it balances other beers really well. It's a nice contrast to an IPA or something like that.
For sure.
So I'm really happy with it. I like it.
Yeah, I think the big thing about the peanut butter shake is, I think when you get in that love-hate relationship with beer, is that a lot of people are probably drinking it like it's every other beer.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, right? Where this is like, if you're drinking this as a dessert beer or a nightcap or those type of things, it's a great beer for that, right? Yeah. It's so bold. It's so in your face, and it's so palate filling that it's a really nice beer.
Yeah, absolutely. So back to stories with Sean. What is your scariest or most intimidating brew moment?
It's a good one. I pick from the 700 that I can think of.
There's a few I can think of that you might go with. So
yeah, I think that the worst moments, I think, especially in the beginning, which again goes back to the times where no one tells you what being a commercial brewer is. Like no one tells you that job because it doesn't exist. It's just it's what we deal with. It's the fact that you have to brew beer, but you also have to be an electrical engineer, and you have to be a chemical engineer, and you have to be an HVAC specialist, and all of these type of things. But probably the scariest moment that I can think of is when failure happens, right? And the funniest failure moment that I can think of is the very first batch that we brewed at Lakeside. Yeah. So I'm not sure if anybody knows, but when you order grain in large portions, you get them in what's called a tote, and it's 1,000 kilograms of whatever
big
grain.
Big sack.
Big huge thing. It's probably about 4 feet by 4 feet, about the size of a skid, right? And they stand about maybe 4 feet tall. The very first time we brewed, we're like, okay, like how do people normally use those things? Like, oh, okay, like you normally pick them up and they have a chute on the bottom of them, right? So it's like, okay, well, we'll just pick it up and we'll open this chute and we'll just fill this garbage can. And
I completely forgot about this. This is awesome.
And there was a point in time where like, yeah, this is working well. It's like, okay, it's going through. And then do you think you can stop that? Not a chance. Not a chance at all.
It's going.
So we've got 300 kilograms of barley on the floor. And then not only that though, right? So it's like, okay, like we're dealing with that. It's fine. We're going to lose some barley first batch. There's got to be some losses, right? And then we're like, okay, well, we got to mill this off. So the first thing we're like, okay, well, we just open the mill and, there's a hopper on the top. Essentially, it looks like any hopper does. And then you fill that with barley. And then there's a little chute that you open up that feeds that to the mill. That mill mills into the augers. The augers bring it up. Us not knowing, because we've never done this before, it's like, okay, we just open it up. Yeah. So we open it up fully, mill jams instantly. So we've got 300 kilograms of barley on the floor. We've got a jam mill. Never had to deal with any of that before. Yeah, that's definitely probably one of the scariest moments, especially since I'm the one in charge of all this. So I've got my two bosses looking at me like,
here I was at the time looking to Sean for the expertise on this stuff. And we've got grain all over the floor and a jam mill, and it's like, ooh, a good first brew.
We're doing it, guys. We're doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
But it went as smoothly as an 18-hour brew day could go to fill one batch into one.
So I didn't think that you were maybe going to go that one. I was thinking that a good one might have been the fire.
The fire I try to block out of my mind as much as humanly possible, because you know what the best part about the fire was? The best part for me, right? So obviously, like, I'm at home at that point. This, we had a fire at the brewery, and I'm messaging my staff and going, "Okay, what's going on here? What's going on there?" And then everything went dead, and I'm like, "Okay, well, we have things to do. I need to know what's going on." So I phone. Yeah. No one answers. I phone a couple more times. No one answers. And I'm like, "Okay, well, screw this." I'm phoning Adam, which was an employee we had back then. And I'm like, he'll answer. I know he will, right? So he answers the phone, and he's sounding a little distressed. And I'm like, hey, man, like, take a breath. Like, what's going on? He's like, the brewery's on fire. I'm like, okay. Is this a fire that we can put out? He's like, well, I don't know. Like, the fire department's here now. I'm like, okay, this is a serious fire. Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, what's going on? Like, where's everybody? And he's explaining the situation. I'm like, okay. I'm like, that's great. I'm like, who's there? And he's like, mentioned some people. I'm like, Steve's there. He's like, yeah, Steve's there, but he's kind of busy. I'm like, okay. So I think that I called Sav, which your wife, Savannah, and I was like, hey, did you know that there's a fire at the brewery? Or maybe you didn't answer. It's been a while now.
So I remember I was in British Columbia.
Yep.
And we were just about to start selling out there and launch Legion Lager in BC, and you were coming out in a few days.
Yep.
And I was already out there. And I picked up the phone to you. I was just having lunch. And you said, has anyone told you yet?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this isn't good.
No.
But all was good. Everything got fixed and sold. So
no fires since then.
No fires since then.
I'm not saying we don't have like a number counter on the wall, but in my head, it's been this many days since we've had a fire.
It's been 950 days since the last fire. Okay, next question. What does it mean on a personal level to win 4 medals at the Ontario Brewing Awards?
That's a good question.
This is coming off the back of 2 more medals this year and 2 last year.
Yeah, so I think that the ones that we won last year, like the first thing that hit me on that was like, oh, this is awesome. It's super motivational. My staff works really hard, and it's good to see some progression through those things. Internally in my own head, I'm thinking like, okay, well, I didn't make the recipes for these beers, right? Like, I brought them over, we scaled them up, I've refined the recipes as we've gone, we've made the beer what it is today, and that's great.
But you're right, we were brewing, for the viewers that don't know, Farmer's Daughter and Class 5 IPA won gold medals at the Ontario Brewing Awards 2 years ago.
Yep.
And those were our original beers, so we were brewing them before Sean started. Yep. He's done a lot with the recipes, So he's not doing himself justice, but I get what he means.
For
they
sure.
want his original recipe.
I didn't start them, right?
Yep.
And that's just, I guess that's the brewer and every brewer, right?
Yep.
Where you're like, oh, like I started with a baseline, and you go from there, and that's
you made
fine,
changes
right?
and tweaks
of course,
rather than creating.
Well, and it's a very difficult thing to take, a 50-liter batch.
Yeah.
And make 7,000 liters of it,
Right.
so some tweaks have to
Sure.
happen to make it in line.
Yeah.
But this year is probably one of my proudest moments as a commercial brewer because, both recipes that did win, which would have been Legion Lager won a bronze,
Yep.
I think, which was super unexpected, and then Blood Moon, which is our blood orange sour, won gold.
Yep.
And I think both of those, especially the sour side of it, was something that I've never really done a lot of. It took a lot of struggle and hardship to understand how we brew sours in a brewery that you don't want anything to be sour in.
Yep.
But those were the first two beers on a commercial level that I had won awards for that were my recipes. I started those, I created those, and I moved forward with them. And it was really nice to see, I guess, just a little bit more of a recognition side of things for the work that I've done.
Yeah, absolutely, and big shout out to the rest of the brew team and
sure.
Sean. Congratulations on the amazing beers you guys continue to brew.
Well, especially when it comes to the both of those beers, which are hard beers to make, right? A lager takes longer than it normally should, and then the sour side of it takes longer, and you add fruit.
And also, the lager category is as competitive as it gets.
For sure.
That and New England IPA right now are the two most competitive categories, probably.
And the brewery that was right ahead of us in the silver was Steam Whistle.
So
Right? Which is that's
30 years of
quintessential,
an amazing Czech lager.
Well, quintessential, right? It's a pretty nice place to be.
Absolutely. Awesome. Why don't you tell us how the brew team goes through the research and development R&D process for creating a new beer, new product?
Sure. So in a general sense, normally it all starts with an idea. The idea can come from really anywhere. Most of the time it's an idea of a style that the market has demand for. So it's, I think it's another part of brewing that no one really understands when you get into the commercial side of it is my opinion really doesn't matter. What I want to brew really doesn't matter because, I'll buy it. And if I could have enough money to support your whole brewery, Chris, I think that I would help you with that. So once we have that idea, normally I'll take that style, flavor, whatever we want to do, and I'll take that down to like a research perspective. So normally I will research the style or I'll research those flavors, try to figure out how to make those flavors integral to a beer. From that point, I'm either figuring out the style or figuring out the other side of it. And then we come up with our baseline recipe. We've been in a very luxurious position so far that we really don't have a pilot system to go through. So I normally send the first batches off at about 3,500 liters.
Yeah.
Which
just to put it in perspective, that's like 7,000 cans minimum.
So the good part about it is it stresses me out so much that I actually have to make it perfection the first go, but it helps.
Get it right.
You don't have any other options, right? So
and it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be good.
Yeah, we've had ups and downs with it, but I don't think we've ever had one that came across on a new SKU that wasn't. It's fine, right? Sometimes it's a little too bitter, or it's a little too sweet, or it needs a little bit more of this, a little more of that flavor, right? So once I've done the recipe side of it, I try to be part of brand new brews every single time. I think it's another component that we don't have to talk about now, but as you become more and more in the brewmaster role, you actually step away from being on the floor and doing the things that you love, right? So it's a little hardship there, but
it's Sean's nice way of saying he doesn't have to shovel out the spent grain.
It's true
anymore.
It's true. No one misses that. So once it's been kind of pushed to the manufacturing production side of things, it's really up to my staff to kind of use their capabilities and their professional knowledge to kind of make sure that we're hitting the marks as we're going across the way, be it, gravities, which is sugar content that dictates the alcohol content final, be it flavors coming across in the pre-production phase, carbonation, flavorings if there are some, and really having that kind of longer process in a first beer to come through to make sure that what comes out in the end, we've taken our due diligence and made sure that it can taste like it can.
For sure. What was the most recent beer we went through that process on?
So that would have been High Tide.
Yep.
Yeah. High Tide would have been Probably one of the most difficult beers that I've ever R&D'd. I think that's a very, people that don't know about High Tide, it's a New England IPA. So New England IPA is a very hazy, soft mouthfeel, full of hops beer, but there's no bitterness to it. You wanted to have
and that's the big difference. Like traditionally, all IPAs had a lot of bitterness because they're packed full of hops. And more recently things have developed and they're less bitter, but they're still quite bitter. Like there's still 40, 50 IBUs.
In your normal range of people that don't enjoy bitterness, would still be off that scale. Right.
So, whereas High Tide, the New England IPA, is 10 IBUs. That's like half the bitterness of Farmer's Daughter. Yeah. So completely different concept for IPAs generally.
Of course it is, yeah. And I think that goes to why the style has been blowing up a lot, because you're kind of starting to blur these lines now between IPA drinkers love it, non-IPA drinkers love it, because you're kind of getting the best of both worlds.
I already know people, my wife Savannah included, who do not generally like IPAs because of the bitterness.
Of course, yeah.
And she loves this because you've got all that juicy, fruity flavor and aroma.
For sure.
Without the bitterness. So it's a cool dynamic. Personally, I love New England IPAs. I still love bitter IPAs. I like black coffee too, and but
I'm in the same boat as well. Like I enjoy real IPAs, and I know that's a point of contention with people, but
let's go with tradition.
But I like IPAs that have a little bit of malt character. They have like a lot of bitterness to back that up, and they're very well balanced beers. They're not thin and yellow and all the other terms, which, that's just my personal preference.
And mine too. I mean, my long-standing favorite beer that we brew is Class 5 IPA. Traditional style, like English IPA, malty and bitter and hoppy.
Yeah, for sure.
Similar to other Ontario beers. I'll give shout-outs to them. Muskoka Mad Tom and Amsterdam Bone Shaker. Slightly different, but same style, and they're the two others that really hold up that category.
For sure, and it's a small category now.
It is.
There's not a lot of people holding up that beer anymore. Right?
I can't think of many others.
No, neither can I.
But they're two amazing beers in that same category, and I think Class 5 really holds.
And I think kudos to us and the two of them for those type of it, because it's not easy being some of the sole people holding up a style that's dying, right? And it is a very dying style, but at least we have the luxury of knowing there's people that love those beers. There's people that are always going to drink those beers, and we know that brand loyalty or that style loyalty is kind of just consistent across the board, right?
So, note for all you watchers and listeners, if you like Mad Tom, Bone Shaker, or Class 5 IPA, you've now got two others that you might like. So,
agreed.
There you go. Speaking of R&D and sort of creation of products, why don't you tell us a little bit about how we got into gin and what we're doing there?
Yeah, so I think that we got into gin because Chris likes gin. No.
Yep. And I'm English, and gin's an English thing. And,
it sure is, yeah.
Everyone else wanted different spirits, and I was like, no, it has to be gin.
Yeah, so gin was an interesting, I don't know, pivot's the word because we're still doing our thing, right? But it's definitely an interesting side step for what we're doing.
Diversification.
Right? I agree. And I think that spirits is always something that's on everybody's mind when it comes to making alcoholic beverages as a whole, right? I think that's, it's a progression. It makes sense to move those ways. It's something that I think that really diversifies us, like you said. I think that it allows us that hit where we aren't there.
I mean, I think based on that, like, what we want to do is create great products for people to enjoy and create memorable experiences throughout that. And beer is a great avenue for that.
For sure.
But it's limited. Yeah. And we added in our brew pubs, so food is a great avenue for that, but it's limited. And this is just another way we can reach more people and show more creativity.
Yeah, and I think that, it'll be a very interesting thing when we get to the point of taking that distillation in house and being able to do a more diversified portfolio on it, right? Sure. I don't know how many people know what we're doing with the spirits right now, but obviously we're using a partner distillery that we very much trust, and we think that they do a great job at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that the R&D process that we did on the gin was a pretty, as in-depth as you could have really have gone into that R&D process, where I don't even think I've ever drank that much straight spirits.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know,
life, right?
and you would only really know if you've been to one of our amazing brewers or distillers dinner at the brewery in Cobden. So yeah, like Sean said, we partnered with a distillery in Ontario, and we really started working on recipe development with them. And it's all with the end goal of bringing distilling in-house and creating a distillery, but we needed some track record and some proof of concept. And we worked with this amazing distillery that already is in existence, and we went through 20 to 30 different recipes of gin, making minor tweaks and sipping on them through the winter. And it was really challenging for Sean and I, to show up at work at 9 a.m. and have to sip on 5 different gins.
It's true. I don't understand why you always made me drink gin at 10 a.m. I don't understand that side of it. But it helped make the day productive. But it was a good time. It was very interesting.
It's one of the tough areas of the job. But so that's going. We launched Paperboat Gin in the LCBO, and it's a really easy drinking, non-offensive style gin, great in a variety of cocktails. So we'll talk more on that later, but if you haven't tried it yet, you can do so at the brewery in Cobden or available in the LCBO. Also, if you like cocktails, gin-based cocktails especially, then make sure to watch our Cocktails and Dreams episodes on YouTube, where you have myself, sometimes a special guest, shaking up some cocktails. Moving on, and in closing, Sean,
Sure.
What can we expect from the brew team next?
Oh, wow.
What's coming? What's down the pipeline?
Just right on the spot.
Yeah, let's give a sneak peek for people.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I think that obviously, like High Tide's very new, and we haven't had a massive amount of production on it outside, so that's going to be coming. I think we talked about that a bit, so that's fine. I think that the next latest, greatest thing I think that people will see is a beer that is going to be called Low Hanging Fruit. So it's going to be another sour that we're coming out with. Some of you may have had the luxury, if you're in the Ottawa area, to drink a similar style that was at Craft Beer Market, a very colorful sour. But this is going to be our pomegranate and black currant, or chassis, if you call it that, sour, which is a very fruit-forward sour. It's definitely a little more bold on the fruit side of it, where with Blood Moon and Wild Bog, we definitely are increasing those levels.
Even from a color perspective, right? This is your sort of yellowy golden color.
Yeah, for the Wild Bog.
For Wild Bog, and Blood Moon's similar, a little bit more clear, and then the low hanging fruit, blackcurrant pomegranate, has much more of a pinky purple hue. For sure,
and it'll be a much more aggressively colored one as well. Yeah. That's our goal. Like obviously, we haven't started pumping it out yet, so we can't really comment on the exact color. But the goal for myself and the cellar team is pretty stoked about this beer, and they're like, "But Sean, it has to be colored. It has to be." Yeah. And I'm like, "Well, let's make it colored then." And it's really about making sure that they're doing the best they can on that. I think that the only other thing that I can think of that would be, maybe it's 2 things. But plan is to hopefully try to brew some more Jack Rabbit. I think that'll be an interesting thing. I think that people were very interested in it and want to buy it on its own.
Right now, only available in the 4-pack.
Only available.
Hilarious story. On the weekend, I was in the LCBO and found a 4-pack with 2 cans of Farmer's Daughter.
Oh no!
And I know that we did not package that.
No, that didn't happen.
Somebody had switched out a Jack Rabbit for a Farmer's Daughter and 2 4-packs so that they could buy a 4-pack and take 2 Jack Rabbits home.
Sneaky bugger. Yeah. Sneaky bugger.
Sneaky, but genius at the same time. I think there's demand for it, people that want it.
For sure.
And you can expect maybe that coming in single cans for a small limited batch in the new year.
For sure. The only other teaser that I can think of right now is there are some plans for some more Icebreaker.
Yeah.
I think that's something that people that enjoy that beer should probably start keeping an eye out. Maybe there'll be some icebreakers sooner than they think, and I think that'll be.
I got
a good
one
beer.
other thing though. So icebreakers actually. I say this quite frequently now, but one of my favorite beers.
They're all our favorites.
Yeah.
You can't pick between your children. It's just weird.
Right. Exactly. But we're down at Riverside here in a socially distant podcast set. Why don't you let the viewers know what we're going to be doing down here in the new year? Sure,
yeah. So I think that the first couple of things that we're planning on doing here are obviously beers that we've just never done before. I think that's the whole point. We actually have a little pilot system going. Goal is definitely to delve a little more into some IPAs that maybe aren't traditional.
Yep.
I think that might be one of the best spots to start, and I think that I really want to push the envelope on beers that we've never really made.
Yep.
I think that one of the beers that I want to make almost right away, and maybe won't be right in January, is we've had conversations and talks about doing a Doppelbock. I think that's something that I really want to push forward. I also feel like we want to do a rye IPA for a very long time, and that's going to be there. And then the beer that I think everybody wants, especially locally, is I just want to bring back some ambers.
Yeah.
I think that ambers is just something
I
that's
was
just
talking
thriving,
to one of my friends recently about, he mentioned amber, and I was like, you know what else I really like? Is like a honey brown.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
They're so rare these days. But when I first came to Canada and I was living out west, it was like honey brown was my
that was it.
My $9 pitcher of choice.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, I agree. And I think that one thing that I think I would tell like long time Whitewater drinkers, maybe not long time listeners,
right?
Is I really want to just make sure we go through every single old style we used to make.
Yeah.
Get some rhubarb wheat back in here, get some ginger wheat back in here, and it's going to be short runs. It's not going to be a huge thing, but it would be, keep your eye out and make sure you're watching so that, when those do come up, you can come and grab a growler of rhubarb wheat that you haven't had in 3.5 years.
And that's what I was getting at. So I didn't want something specific, but for those that don't know, we're back down at Riverside year round. We're brewing every week down here. Some unique stuff, some old stuff, just to bring some more variety to what we're doing, as well as all the amazing big batch brews we do up in Cobden. So we'll have come January, we'll be releasing some short run different beers on certainly a monthly basis, which will be available to you, but in very limited quantities. We're talking hundreds of cans as opposed to thousands.
Yeah.
So if you see something you like, there will be a short window together. Okay. That's it for the list, which is pretty great. I'm going to just go over some housekeeping things with you viewers and listeners right now. I'm recording here. It's mid-December. This podcast is going live on, I believe, December 23rd. So happy Christmas Eve. For those people... You like that?
I like it. It was good. It was good.
I took that on my
It's a day I celebrate often. I'm just saying.
That's out of my dad's playlist. He also goes with his birthday Christmas Eve or birthday Boxing Day.
Oh yeah,
which is in June, just to be clear.
Okay.
So, but for those of you watching and listening, and it's still December, if you're looking for New Year's Eve plans, we have a fantastic COVID-friendly New Year's Eve planned at our Lakeside Brewery in Cobden. We have a great selection of steaks that aren't typically available on our menu. I don't know what the full list is, but I know it includes a porterhouse steak, for example.
Woo.
So that's planned for New Year's Eve. Tickets are live already as of December 23rd for sure. But very limited quantity due to COVID. So please get online and book right now if you haven't already and you want to come. Go to our Facebook page or shopwhitewater.ca for more information on tickets and everything Whitewater generally. Otherwise, that's all from us. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks to Sean Goddard, our brewmaster.
No problem. It was fun.
How long's it been? 5.5 years now.
Yeah, 5.5. Yeah,
awesome.
5.5 years at Whitewater. Yeah.
So that's a great benchmark and great achievement in itself. Thank you everyone for watching and or listening. This is episode 2 of our monthly podcast, and we look forward to growing this and having you all tune in more often. Please like, subscribe, set notifications, do all that fancy YouTube podcast stuff.
Sure, the bell's just like right underneath Chris.
Yeah, like click here, click here, click here. Savannah's gonna love that in editing. We're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks
Cheers.
for having me. Cheers.